first of all, welcome to all of the esteemed dignitaries here. We've got everyone who's really connected with the policy, with the implementation, the last mile delivery of healthcare right now on the stage, whether it's offline or online. The session is pretty much a very important session because we are talking about how India now during the pandemic, and the pandemic is still not over, has been able to really revive the socio-economic impact. We're looking at the entire opening up of the economy. It was a global economy opening up, which happened a couple of months back, and within no time, I think within less than 3 odd months, we've got another variant. We need to be very careful because this variant is mutable to an extent that it's actually been able to show itself really in a velocity in most of the countries, and fortunately in India, we've not got that kind of an impact which we've seen in the West. But let me first move to Dr. Jayalal. Indian Medical Association has been really being on the toes since day one. It started in almost like March 2020, and till date, I think, and you also joined as the president during that time, till date, there's been no respite. How would you respond to it? And what has been the economic impact to it when you look at the entire healthcare conundrum really crippled globally, but still India was able to really meet the kind of expectations which were there?
Yeah, thank you very much for this. And in fact, we are now at this moment, probably we are in a little positive note of the COVID pandemic. Definitely, the healthcare industry per se has suffered a lot on the economic front for various reasons. One of the footfalls in the hospitals are reduced. The extra care infrastructure development which we need to occupy or carry on to combat the COVID virus was also very high. The hospitals had to sustain the manpower, sustain the infrastructure facilities, and it was the outcome or the net economic loss was very high. But fortunately, for the last 2-3 months, with the persistent post-COVID symptoms which is persisting among the public, and the normalcy is slowly limping back to normalcy in the country. Now hospitals are now getting back to normalcy. That also says the public economy system is also improving. Now it is time for us, having gone through that almost 2 years of this post-COVID era, and we need to learn to adapt to the new technologies, adapt to the new measures by which that we will be able to sail through amidst Omicron, amidst any other variant who is going to come. We cannot say a reason that we need to go for a old style of shutting down everything, lock down everything, and getting away from everything. But we need to face this as a big challenge, and we need to adopt whatever the technology we have, like a simple code-appropriate behavior technology and the protective vaccination technology. Then we should go forward with a positive mindset. And here it is your mental strength is going to help you even in your economic outcome, which we are going to do. And if we are finding excuses to get back into the old style, I think definitely we will not be able to come out of this. So what we appeal at this moment, this is a golden time, and we have a very well-organized infrastructure, well-organized setup of the government. So with that, with all that combination power, we should go forward in a positive mode. Yes, we are well prepared, but there are certain areas where there is definitely more as a government, as an organization, as an individual we can do, so that we will continuously discuss on that.
Sir, you mentioned a very important thing that yes, we are prepared, but then the preparedness is not up to the mark. I mean, that's how the tone and the tenor went. When we looked at the entire infrastructure, when we looked at how healthcare at one point of time, India was grappling, India was really not prepared. The motivation of physicians, doctors, last mile healthcare workers, nurses, ambulances, that really took a toll. And that took a toll in such a way that initially it was, really, I mean, each and every healthcare worker was garlanded. We have even, Sukhois and the aircrafts really flying the entire AIIMS campus around it. Today, how would you feel when we look at the entire infrastructure getting overhauled? Wasn't that supposed to happen sometime back? And the impact today?
Absolutely. This is a demand which the healthcare professionals were raising to the government since for a long, many years, that healthcare infrastructure should be given priority. Unfortunately, it is only hardly 1.25 percentage of the GDP is allotted to the healthcare infrastructure. If the government or the public should understood that health is one of the important the pillar for the development of the country, and if there's a more care we would have given, definitely we would have been much better on that time. But still now, even after learning from the post-COVID and the complications, and we have not realized the importance of the maintaining the health, where one of the most important predominant figure for the health of the country is the health of the professional. Health of the professionals, if it is not ensured properly, the health of the country cannot be attained. What I mean by health of the professional, in the COVID war, 2,000 doctors or the healthcare workers had died and many more frontline workers. There was nothing like this is being taken care by anyone to recognize these people as a martyrs of this country. When every year, even the parliament today observed to remember the people who have sacrificed their life to save the parliament in a war. Of course, it is mandatory, but equally it is important. 2,000 doctors who has died, and we need to get that gives a moral support. Second most important, why they have died, we know for sure it is because of their highly exposed, their working time was more, the way in which they were forced up to work more time. So what is the solution is a manpower need to be augmented. Though we have a physical infrastructures, yes, government has done very positively, but on the manpower, which is the most important thing, even you can have a ventilator, but somebody should be there to operate it. There we are dramatically failed, and that is what we are seeing on the streets today, that the postgraduates are on the strike, not on their fault. But since January, then we are fighting for that. These people should be, the adequate manpower should be increased. So I will say from the most important area where we have successfully learned in the post-COVID is infrastructure development. Yes, we are done. But the manpower development, we neither respecting, promoting, safeguarding, and protecting them. We are not doing that.
Thank you, sir. I think very well said around that, and we need to hail the entire healthcare fraternity who've really worked around that. Sir, coming to the entire infrastructure development, you touched upon a very important point. I'll go to Dr. Mahajan on this. Infrastructure development, India did not have those kind of testing labs. There were certainly no, testing and diagnostic kits, IVDs, etc., which was available. Your journey from the day when India decided to go for a lockdown and rampant its entire testing, how would that be an entire turnover today when you look at it, when we've already crossed the first wave, the second lethal wave, and we're now touching the new wave, which is, which supposedly WHO says, but then we've not seen that kind of an impact. Sir, your views.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this panel with such illustrious co-participants. Now, India, when the COVID wave hit, was capable of doing just about a few hundred RT-PCR tests in a day. And this is, the public sector and the private sector put together. I must say that the government encouraged and the private sector really came into its own. And very soon, both hand in hand, and this is really an example that the private sector and the public sector can work together. Very quickly, not only did the number of labs doing RT-PCR tests ramp up, and the government had mandated that only private sector labs which were NABL accredited would be allowed to do RT-PCR testing for COVID-19, which is right because you can't compromise on quality. And that's where NABL as an organization got its act together, and online, accreditation was given. And believe you me when I say probably the online, accreditation process was more stringent than when it was done physically, because everything had to be shown on camera. And a lot of to and fro with the technologists, technicians, doctors was happening. And you know, NABL inspectors are amongst us only. They are not full-time employees of NABL. And so these tests were conducted after 4, 5 p.m. and went on till 12 at night. Such was the commitment of NABL and its inspectors. Having said that, very quickly it was ramped up, and I think within a matter of a few months, India from 100 tests, today we can do 2.5 million tests a day. And we are
Laudable,
capable
very
of
laudable.
doing more. And this was not only the labs. Labs couldn't have done it if every test kit was to be imported. You remember during those years, during those months, you know, we were not able to get even masks, surgical masks, N95 masks. Nothing was available in the country. And similar was the thing with the testing kits. That's where, because everyone globally wanted the testing kits, and those countries which could pay more for it had a better chance of getting them quickly. And that's where I must say our medtech sector came into its own. And today there are nearly 120 to 150 companies which are producing these kits indigenously. And today India has become a net exporter of these RT-PCR kits. And it's only because of that that we are able to ramp up to these numbers, and we can go beyond also. So the testing labs, where the doctors played a role, and the medtech sector, which got indigenous testing kits made, and these were all accredited, and they passed all kind of quality checks. It wasn't that because we had the need, all and sundry could come in. That wasn't the case. So because of this, and I think the ICMR played a major role in this, in bringing everyone together, in listening to the private sector, in being able to formulate guidelines in harmony with the private sector. And this is how the whole journey has been undertaken. And we have reached the stage where there is no dearth of testing. Now, what happens is that when a pandemic, we all know, we've seen it, it comes in waves. Slowly and then very rapidly with the Delta variant in the second wave, the numbers tend to go up. And that's when, you know, we've heard test, test, test. The numbers go up. And then as the wave ebbs and comes down, slowly the numbers go down. And that's where mistakes are made. Because we need to keep up testing up to a level that we are not able, missing something. If there is a certain spike which is happening in a geographical area, and if testing is low because we feel that we are fine, and that's what happened December, January, February, even March, when the number of tests really flagged, and we didn't know that such a huge wave was coming. Now, this is about RT-PCR tests. The next most important part of testing in a pandemic, as we know now, everyone knows that there's something called genome sequencing. Everyone knows that, you know, there is something called mutation, that the virus will keep changing its shape, its, how contagious it is, how virulent it is. And that's another area where I think in the first year or so of the pandemic, we were a little complacent with genomic testing. And this again, we are able to identify mutations only because we do genome sequencing. And this is where INSACOG came into being, a government agency which now has 36 labs within it. But I feel, especially with the Omicron variant rearing its head, in UK you're seeing it's causing mayhem. 60% of all new infections in London yesterday were because of the Omicron variant. And this, there are tests which are coming in which may be able to identify Omicron on RT-PCR also, but the final proof is only with genome sequencing. And that's where I think the government now needs to bring in the private sector. The Honorable Health Minister has spoken about this in Parliament. There are many labs like ours which are capable of doing genome sequencing. We in our lab can do 1,500 samples a week, which is a large number. And there are several others across the country like ours. I think this is the next step where, again, the private sector would need to be looked at apart from the public sector, because we may need to ramp up capacity very, very soon. If we don't do that, then we will feel we don't have Omicron in our midst, and we may again miss the bus and have a third wave coming in January, February. So, but what I would say is that the country really rose as one to fight this challenge, and without testing, we would not have overcome the ferocity of the waves that we've seen, especially the second wave. And if we let our efforts flag now, then we are in for bad times, and we may see a third wave coming in. Hopefully, that will not happen. We are actually trying to guard our borders, but once these Omicron variant and people who are carrying them, if they get through the sieve that we have had at our ports, airports, as well as at our ports on the water, then this is very, very contagious, and it can lead to another wave.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
keeping our fingers crossed that we don't get to see another third wave. You mentioned upon a couple of very important facts. One is obviously the entire testing ramping up, and the medtech industry coming up to really become Atmanirbhar or self-reliant. Today, if we have that kind of a spiel which is running through the entire medtech sector, we would be net exporters. We have already become a net exporter to that. Another important thing which you mentioned about is the entire public-private partnership, which really steered very well during this pandemic. And we saw how the government and the private sector glued together to come up with an entire new paradigm, which is, I would say, from a point of view, from a public health angle, a PPP could be really retermed as a partnership for a public purpose rather than partnership, a public-private partnership. So coming to you, Mr. Jain, the entire public health conundrum, it started way back, and then we had, in the 50s and the 60s, where we thought of ramping, healthcare in India. We had several commissions, and then lately we had the Universal Health Coverage Report, which was tabled by the Planning Commission, now the Niti Aayog. How do you see public health really unfurl from here and impact the entire socio-economic strata if it was to be ramped up as per the UHC report, which Professor Srinath Reddy and others, you were in fact one of the authors to that report. How would you see that really impact now, and the entire socio-economic strata being really taken forward with a deepened GDP expenditure on public health?
Thanks for that. Firstly, I'm going to say hi to all my friends, Bisho, Jack, Ramanan. I was hoping to see you in person. That's my social need. So good to see you on the screen anyway, and hope to catch up soon. When I walked in and Kamal said, good to see you in person, I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm tired of seeing my family. I want to see new faces. So I'm hoping that that's going to be a long-term reality. Unfortunately, the situation, as we know, is seeming to take a turn, and we'll keep watching it. I think, firstly, to your question of the impact on socioeconomic, I think COVID has been, in a way, from a public health perspective, it's been a huge blessing, because public health per se was never actually seen as a comprehensive challenge which all of us face. When I say all of us, I'm talking about the inequities that exist. You know, when I think of public health, or when I think of health, I'd go to a Mahajan clinic, get myself diagnosed. I'd go to a big hospital, get myself treated. But the whole inequity of people who don't have access, I think that's what we need to really think about. What COVID did was actually put us all in the same platform. So all of a sudden, the economy just came to a standstill. We realized that this was not about protecting me, myself, my family, and going to great facilities. It was about the health of the public. So I think, like I said, it's been a fantastic, in a way, a turning point, if we are able to actually ride on this wave. The other thing that happened, so the economy got devastated, and nobody can deny that. Some of us who work in healthcare got very busy. So from that perspective, yeah, I mean, I still got my salary. But generally, the economy got completely devastated during this process. Social structures have all they've just vanished, right? It's just become a complete mess. And you don't know what's going to come as if this pandemic continues the way it's going, if we have a third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave, whatever, and how are we going to... I mean, even I'm meeting two friends in the evening, and I was getting messages as we came in, and they said, do we continue or do we cancel, considering what we're looking at. So that really got devastated. But the good thing is that, the investment that we should have made in public health over the last 75 years, I think the time has come to make that investment. The time has come to put it together. And we are realizing that health is going to impact society, health is going to impact the economy. So we have to do it. More importantly, it's also become very political. And I'm really happy because all elections are going to be fought on health now. And I hope that continues, because if that happens, there's a mandate, right? There's a mandate, there's an intent, there's a push, there's going to be actual action on the ground, which we will be able to see. What will it do for our country? It's going to take us, definitely, we're going to leapfrog. If we are able to use COVID as a reason to do that, so be it. We've all got devastated. I think in terms of our own response within the country, the response was, I would say I'd put it right up there if I compare with the rest of the world. Even developed countries which had strong public health systems also got damaged. We did our best to control and manage as much as we could. Could we have done things better? Always. There are, we all saw the migrants walking on the streets. We all saw the kind of impact it had when you shut down, when you had a lockdown and supply chains got destroyed, etc. So yes, we definitely can do much better. But I think what also we need to do is think about resilience, think about how are we going to set up our public health system so that doesn't become the cause for this socio-economic damage that we've seen over the years. So,
absolutely, absolutely. I think you touched upon two very important things. One is inequality, and the other one is accessibility. And that, I think, was not only for the entire health conundrum that we witnessed over the last 18, 20 odd months, but also to other sectors. Now, I'll go online right now to our online speakers, and Mr. Parajuli, we looked at the entire set of people who were really not getting access to the to basic commodities, food being one thing. The government of India came up with one policy where they were providing food. But was that enough? Was that enough to really talk about health? Was that enough to really talk about nutrition? Was that enough to really talk about the pandemic? And was that enough to really take the economy really further? Your views on this?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm sorry, I was hoping to be there physically, my friend, but somehow I had to change it at the last minute. Anyway, we'll catch up. Now, to your questions, let's look at this way. Complete lockdown for 3 months, loss of jobs, and millions of people, migrants, movement, and absolutely no source of income. You can imagine not only the poorest segment of the population, but also, in fact, lower middle income people who were depending on wages lost their jobs. I mean, the ILO estimated nearly 100 million, 90 million people were without employment. So in that situation, indeed, it was a massive crisis. Now, the good thing about reference to India is India has this one of the best public distribution system, safety net program. The public distribution, targeted public distribution, midday meal program, and the integrated child support program. These three pillars, they became a good source to reaching out the needy people. And immediately the government injected, food resources through that, doubling the ration what they were giving and at free of cost. In fact, the state is continuing and they have agreed to extend until November now, until March next year. So I would say this was a massive effort, and we have studied about them, and I have personally met, lots of people across the country and checked. They have become a lifeline, and they have become very successful. Now, was it enough for everybody? Did it provide all the food need in terms of diversification of food items, requirement, all vitamins, minerals, etc.? Probably not, because they were more supplementary in some sense, and then people were also supposed to complement with what they have and others. But they were really a big help, and particularly the public distribution program covers 800 million people. I mean, this is enormous. You can imagine the size of it. And some of these states at different stages have become much flexible, covering people with extra cash resources and other support. And more recently also the effort to distribute a fortified rice and to reach out complete fortification by 24, the Prime Minister's initiative. These are commendable efforts. Now, India, apart from making some progress on nutrition front, is still lags behind. In fact, sadly, the latest this National Family Household Survey indicates as high as 42.9% of stunting in Bihar, and a similar high number in a number of states, etc. So overall, stunting is a concern, as well as the anemia is a concern. But in terms of the initiative which was taken and reach out to the scale, personally I have not seen it in any countries, other countries, through internal resources. And indeed, thanks to also the progress India has made in agricultural sector, reaching self-sufficiency in food grain, from 50 million tons about 40 years ago to 300 million tons now. And then this Food Security Act, which guarantees food support to 60+% of the population. I think these are commendable steps. Now, there are some concern, of course. There are people probably missing out of that list, and the states need to be flexible, proactive, to include everyone, and no one need to leave behind. and also provision of maybe complementary support to diversified meals. Unfortunately, because of the COVID, some of these programs like midday meal and ICDS were not run as effectively as they used to be because the schools were closed. The children who used to get a meal, a nice meal, they didn't get it, but it was substituted by take-home ration, and similarly in terms of also the integrated child development program, the take-home ration. So there is yet more to be done in the sense of providing a diversified access to meals and as well as improvement in some of these take-home rations, and then the initiative like fortification which has happened. In fact, the World Food Program is engaged with the government in bringing some of the best practices and really supporting and working with them. The initiative of One Nation, One Card, a system which really brings a flexibility for migrants from any states to access their food ration to other states, is a commendable initiative. The whole digital platform which is available in India is really also a fantastic step. The whole digitalization of public distribution program, the improvement which has taken, and some of the bogus, the beneficiaries who have been taken out of this. Lots of efforts being done, but India is massive, so obviously it's like
Absolutely.
takes time. I would say to reach to a target, maybe there's still a few more things to be done, focusing on like 1,000 days from conceptions to child at 2 years, and then also targeting to some specific areas, and more engagement of private sectors and other entities. And these fronts are really very important.
Absolutely. Very well said points. In fact, I think we should all laud the entire public distribution system that the government had then at that time really laid off, and huge migrants got benefited through that. Moving to Jack, sanitation hygiene, that was one of the areas that really caught the attention, slightly late, but then yes, it was something which was lauded by not only the governments but also people. RWAs were clean enough, we had the entire streets, we had the entire sanitation drives really immaculate. We had not even during a larger epidemic that was witnessed maybe earlier, like plague, etc., was that kind of a sanitation drive that globally went through, and especially like a populous country like India, it made wonders for it. So how do you think that we would be able to keep it on, especially when India has this Swachh Bharat mission or a Clean India mission which it embarks upon now?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that COVID has actually raised the awareness of public hygiene to the highest level in the history of mankind. This is the moment where everybody is very conscious and afraid of contracting the disease. Having said that, I know that during the SARS period in 2003, people were feeling like that as well. However, once the SARS disease goes away, they are all back into not washing their hands and their unhygienic lifestyle. And this is an opportunity for us to maintain the high vigilance against transmittable diseases, public health risk, because it doesn't just come from COVID, right? It comes from all kinds of other diseases transmission. However, I was just in London last month, and already globally, about 90% of the people are no more wearing a mask. And they are going around as if life is just normal. And they also know that every week, 1,000 people die of COVID. But they say, it's the old people and it's not me. And even the old people say it's other people. So I think this is an issue that is both to be decided economically, socially, politically. And for the trade-off, you can also say in a country like India, if you lock down for too long, there might be people dying of hunger in very large number, and if it continues, the marginal income people, the petty trader, the small little worker, he will die of hunger. And so, you know, politically, it's really hard to make a trade-off. The other one is that this is going to be quite a long disease, and people are preparing to live with the virus. And so when you are transiting into this, politicians are going to make decisions based on whether they win or lose election. And there's a lot of casino gambling, which hard to use, and these are very, very difficult decisions. I think that the mental health issue is going to be a huge dimension. And I have this piece of advice. When you have a financial problem caused by the virus, you have one problem. But if you have a stress problem caused by the financial problem, you have two problems. What we need to now remind people is that they got to choose either to have only one problem or to have two problems. Because the second problem of mental health is a self-inflicted problem. Although people might say it's just so natural and intuitive to be stressed. But when you are stressed, it gets worse. So what we need to do is to build inner resilience on people in a word of mouth manner, because if you make a government campaign, this cannot be done. But it can be in the form of staying calm, understanding how to handle your financial problem, your job losses, your difficulty. You know, when people are crammed together in a small house and cannot go out, those very stressful mental problems. Yet, during this time, we need to ask people to choose between having the real problem and also keeping the resilience not to have the mental problem.
Very well said, sir. And in fact, three speakers here, including yourself, have mentioned that it needs to be a political will rather than, you know, an individual will which takes forward any pandemic towards success. So, coming to Ramanand sir, Niti Aayog. We've been seeing Niti Aayog, Dr. Paul really step up the ante when things were really going bad. Today, when we've got three stalwarts speaking from this dais itself, that political will now take forward the change. How optimistic are you that this political will through proper policy will really be a change agent itself?
Thank you, Rajiv, for first of all allowing me to participate in this wonderful deliberation and a very important and timely deliberation on integrated health care and wellness. As the word itself suggests, you know, the word integrated suggests an integrated approach. And an integrated approach is only possible when you have the number of stakeholders coming together from the public sector, the private sector, from the government, from the academia, from the NGOs and civil organizations, all coming together to address this problem, which is a challenge, but which is also a great opportunity for us to address at this point in time. The government, as I am aware, and as I have been part of the Atal Innovation Mission at the Niti Aayog, and being very familiar with what is happening at the Niti Aayog, I can say that the government has been seized with this problem and has taken a number of steps, a number of initiatives in a very holistic manner. First and foremost, as the clarion call of the Honorable Prime Minister was on Atmanirbhar Bharat, the question is, how do we ensure that Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is building a strong, self-resilient India, becomes not only the initiative of the government, but also becomes an initiative of the entire set of stakeholders that we are talking about. And in this, I think the COVID-19 crisis has brought to a very stark realization of the importance of innovation, entrepreneurship, the importance of setting up a number of parallel organizations within the country to be able to address the challenge. Because after all, we are a country of 1.3 billion people. We have more than 650,000 villages. We have 8,000 small towns and cities. We have 715 districts, out of which 115 are called aspirational districts as depicted by the Niti Aayog, because they are at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of basic access to healthcare, education, clean drinking water, hygiene, sanitation, affordable housing, livelihoods, and the quality of life. Now we need to be able to address all of this holistically, and I'm very happy that the topic is integrated well-being and wellness of the people. Because if you don't have that, you will be able to not be able to address the challenges that are there in a holistic manner. Now what has the government gone about doing it? And I think this is very important for us to realize the 4 areas where the government has focused on and where Atmanirbhar Bharat also makes a call. The first is infrastructure. We need to have innovation in infrastructure. How do we ensure that our infrastructure becomes smart infrastructure and we do not have the problems of villages not having access to healthcare facilities, or the lack of healthcare centers being available, and the distribution of medicine and healthcare becoming a possibility for the billions of people that are there in this country. So we need smart villages, smart infrastructure, smart cities, smart districts, smart villages, and smart connectivity. And the government has gone about in a very big way to ensure digital connectivity, digital reach, the Jan Trinity as it is called, more than 1 billion bank accounts to make financing possible in the rural areas, more than 1 billion Aadhaar IDs so that you are able to have unique applications like the Arogya Setu, which now become accessible to the common man irrespective of where they are located, and over 1 billion smartphones, which now makes it possible for you to have local access to healthcare, to advice, to doctors. In fact, in COVID-19, it was fantastic to see how many doctors use the digital technology to be able to reach across to their patients. So that is smart infrastructure. The second is, as many of the speakers brought out, how do we create skills? What we need is the ability to serve 650,000 villages. So we need to ensure that we create community innovation centers across the country. The Atal Innovation Mission, for example, has set up more than 20 community innovation centers and more than 100 incubators spawning several startups. We all know that India is a startup nation with 55,000 startups. But what was very stark during the times of COVID is the Niti Aayog, along with Atal Innovation Mission and all the other departments of the government, they ran a challenge immediately. On March 22nd, 2020, when the lockdown was announced, we launched a challenge to find innovative, curative, preventive, as well as assistive solutions to address the COVID-19 crisis. Now, what was the result? We had 1,500 startups which responded within less than a month, who had immediate solutions that could be in the preventive area, in the assistive area, and of course, some in the curative state. And that came to the rescue for addressing a whole lot of challenges that the government faced. So we had, in this, today we are fortunate to have more than 3,500 innovative healthcare startups. And I think that's a great beginning for a country which is requiring innovation, entrepreneurship, and new job creators to be able to address the several challenges that we have. The third part that we want to ensure is how do we tap this demographic dividend, and that is where skill development, creating more doctors, more nurses, more facilities, more healthcare centers, mental health, as Jackson referred. You know, we need to be able to create a huge number of wellness and well-being centers that brings acute awareness into not just the important dimension of physical health and fitness, which the Honorable Prime Minister himself has been advocating through yoga and all of that, but also to bring awareness of mental health issues and have solutions, innovative solutions to address those problems. And finally, the government has taken a lot of interest in addressing the socio-economic divide. So the Atmanirbhar Bharat identifies these 5 pillars. The pillar of the demographic dividend, where 65% of our country is under 35 years old. And so how do we harness this youthful energy, this youthful talent, this incredible creativity that is bursting through the country and tap it into creating innovative solutions that our country needs. The second is the pillar of infrastructure that I talked about. The third is the pillar of demand that 1.3 billion people have, diverse demands from diverse villages. How do we ensure that the best of healthcare and networked healthcare in India, that is a possibility today because of digital reach, because of 5G technologies, because technology is becoming affordable, available, accessible and advanced. And you have 3D printing, robotics, IoT, driving new solutions in genetics or telemedicine and so on. So how do you make that available to cater to the demand of 1.3 billion people? The pillar of socio-economic divide that we need to address, which is the theme of this conference. How do we still have 22% of our country below the poverty line, 44% of our country agri-economy based, and only 8 tier 1 cities with 8,000 towns and villages, small towns and cities. How do we create 8,000 hubs of healthcare innovation and job creation so that we are able to address these diverse challenges? And finally, the pillar of technology, which becomes the glue to be able to address all of these problems. So I think the government is seized with a very holistic approach to address this, and that is where the political will manifests itself through the various initiatives that the government has launched, either through the Niti Aayog or through various departments of healthcare and others. And at the same time, the private sector, as was pointed out earlier, the private sector rose splendidly to this occasion of supporting all these initiatives and being able to back it up with necessary support so that they are able to see the value of these solutions actually being implemented on the ground.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. In fact, a very valid point in terms of how there has been an entire synergy between all stakeholders and which was much more required. I think your points are very valid in terms of how the government has now made it a public health policy, or how the government is now making health as one of its important figurants when the elections come. And as said by our speakers, health should be the next way forward if India has to really look at infrastructurally. So summing up, a quick rapid fire 10-second round, everyone. Your thoughts, starting from Dr. Mahajan to the panelists here physically, and then the panelists there online. Sir, your thoughts.
I would say, the government, as everyone has said, is seized of the matter, but the reality is not about what you speak, but putting your money where your mouth is. So we are waiting for the budget. We will see whether the government, which has been promising 2.5% of the GDP, let's see what happens in this budget, and then we'll know how serious the government is. We are in the healthcare industry. We feel that this may become a politically sensitive issue, but when it comes to elections, other issues seem to
Absolutely.
become more important. So this budget, I think,
is going to be
would
the focal point.
a defining moment.
Yeah, Dr. Jayalan.
I fully endorse this view of the budget allocation more. And another important area is, repeatedly, the government is talking on the digital health, and we will reach on to that. But what we need is an oxygen, drug, a place, a doctor, a nurse in my village, not a phone call to my village. So let us not just say that I am making it digitally, everybody I am able to connect. That is not going to solve the problem unless you make the physical infrastructure. Do not compare digital infrastructure with the physical infrastructure. What the country needs is the physical infrastructure. For that, we need a budget allocation to far rise to be reach out to the people to satisfy the need of the people.
HR and infrastructure, your points, Mr. Jain.
I am known to be very boring and talk about primary health care. I think if we want to move the nation forward, we need to strengthen our primary health care. Of course, the money would be useful. So I'll stay with both the earlier panelists. But yes, that's where the rubber's going to hit the road. And if we're able to fix that, we're going to be in a different plane.
Jack, your quick take on it. I think.
That the political decision is very, very difficult, and if we can prioritize real solution rather than mirage, this will be very important because politically sometimes they give temporary solution, but this is a life and death issue, so it's very important to focus on the maximum life saved pathway.
Great points, Mr. Parajali.
Saying that our health is what we eat, and so food plays a very critical role, and nutrition is a key factor on that. So the challenge is diversification in the meal, social behavioral changes, and concentrating on the period that impacts more, this 1,000 days, and also uniformity in the responses across various states. I think that should be a priority going forward.
Great. Mr. Ramanathan, the political as well as bureaucratic lift.
Well, I actually come from the private sector. I joined the government for 4.5 years. So I do have a good appreciation of both what the private sector brings as well as the public sector potentially offers. From my point of view, it is very clear. What we need is an integrated, innovative approach towards how do we better the infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure, how do we build greater awareness, not only in the people, but also in corporates. You know, what are corporates doing? It is not just the government which has to shell out money and which has to do all of this stuff. There is a whole lot of activity that the corporates can do in order to be able to support this healthcare movement and awareness and integrated well-being. And thirdly, the necessity for addressing the inequity, the socio-economic divide that we talk about, the digital divides that we talk about, the divide between the 115 aspirational districts and the remaining districts, the 8 tier 1 cities and the 8,000 small towns and cities. That needs an integrated, multi-stakeholder approach. It is not a government or it is not just a political will which is going to solve the problem. It's going to be, all of us are in it, and we have to be able to address this problem and take ownership and responsibility for solving it. That is my take on it, and I'm sure it can be done.
Absolutely fine, and this is like what we all require. Stakeholders coming together, and how India will be able to progress will now define when we have the budget coming out as well as the elections which are coming up, and these are big elections coming up. I thank each and every one, all 6 speakers. They gave us very valuable inputs, and with this we end the session. Thank you very much.